Yo, what's up, YouTube? Long time no see. Hope everybody's out there doing well. So we played a couple leagues off stream with Dimir Shadow. Be uploading both of those pretty quickly. And this is the first one. If you haven't seen the list before, very straightforward, reminiscent of the glory days of Shadow Past. Big delve threats and counter magic everywhere, and thought seasons and shadows and fatal pushes and blah. Just no Temur battle rage. We've kind of decided that there's too much really good one-for-one removal for battle rage. But if that's an option you're wanting to play, there's always Jund. So let's talk about, before we get into the leagues, a few card choices. And I mention them now because the amount of people that ask about them on just about every video is pretty substantial. So I want to make sure that I talk about, like, hey, why am I not including these card choices? The first off being Tainted Indulgence. And for me, the big reason for Tainted Indulgence, or not playing Tainted Indulgence, is Consider is much better as a keep low count keep card, or low land count keep card. I can keep it or keep a one lander with a Consider that I couldn't do with the Tainted Indulgence. So it gives me more keepable opening sevens. It fits the curve better when you get to like turn 3 and 4, when you might have 3 lands, you want to like counterspell plus hold up Consider. But if you tap off of counterspell for like a Tainted Indulgence, then you run the risk of getting caught by something, caught by an Endurance or a Rhinos, like a Cascade spell, or just something in there. Just 2 mana for a cantrip is a lot to ask. Half the time with Consider, you're seeing, or you're keeping the first card. Half the time you're seeing the second card, which is Tainted Indulgence in a nutshell. Like, you're digging 2 cards. So 50% of the time, you're seeing the same amount of cards. 100% of the time, you're seeing less mana to do so. The downside, obviously, like, Tainted Indulgence helps you sculpt your hand a little bit better, but it is very rarely going to be 2 mana draw 2. One of the big reasons is you never want to discard a Murktide Regent. Like, the deck has 8 threats, realistically, 4 Murktide, 4 Shadow. If you're playing Brazen Borrower, you can include that. Sometimes Street Wraith. But realistically, we run way too few threats to consider discarding them. So Tainted Indulgence to like ditch extra Murktides very rarely comes up. So you're just paying 2 mana for a C2 cantrip, and I honestly just do not believe it's worth it. Second question is Basic Swamp. Why are we not playing Basic Swamp? If you want to play around Blood Moon, play Basic Swamp. And the realistic side of that is Basic Swamp is fine against exactly Blood Moon, but in every single match that you don't see Blood Moon, the way that you win games is by going turn 1, whatever you want to play, turn 2 Counterspell, turn 3 Archmage's Charm, turn 4 Murktide plus Counterspell, or Counterspell plus Counterspell, turn 5 or turn 6, turn 5 Murktide plus Archmage's Charm, or Counterspell plus Charm, or turn 3 Murktide plus Stubborn Denial, whatever the case may be. The way you lose games is not being able to do that. And Swamp stops you from doing that. If you could have the Swamp as like your 61st card and you hold it over here somewhere, and whenever you want to fetch it, you have it, but whenever you don't want to fetch it, you never draw it, it would be perfect. I would run the Swamp all day. But that's not how the game plays out. And the last thing you want is to not be able to hold up like Counterspell plus Stub, or double Counterspell, or Murktide plus Counterspell, because you have the Basic Swamp. I guarantee you, and please, as always, I encourage people, if you think the Swamp is right, play the Swamp. Absolutely. Go run it. But please take objective notes on the card. Do not say, hey, I played against Blood Moon this one time and I had the Basic Swamp and I won because of it. but then don't include your, well, I lost 4 games because I played a Murktide and had a basic swamp and I couldn't hold up counterspell and they leyline binding my Murktide and I lost the game. You can't include the good without also including the bad. I recognize that this list without swamp is worse against Blood Moon, but I'm willing to accept that to be more consistent against everything else. The last card I wanted to mention, mentioned Tainted Indulgence, mentioned Basic Swamp, is Ledger Shredder. Why aren't you playing Ledger Shredder? Because we are never proactively triggering Ledger Shredder. Like, the reason that Shredder is so good in the blue-red Murktide decks is you can Shredder Bobble, you can Shredder Ragavan, Shredder Channeler, Shredder Expressive Iteration, Shredder Murktide. You have all these options to interact after you play the Shredder to double spell. And so you're able to start proactively filtering your hands. We don't have that. We don't have Channeler, Ragavan, Expressive Iteration. We've got reactive cards like Fatal Push, Drown and Lock, Counterspell, Archmage's Charm, Dismember, Street Wraith that doesn't count as a spell. If you start playing Baubles, you're cutting into our interactive spells, and the deck can't function if you lose interactive spells. Like, we don't have the card advantage engine to make up for having more interactive spells. We don't have the ability to filter away, to filter through the dead draws to find more interactive spells. We have to have a critical mass of that interaction. So again, if you think Ledger Shredder is the answer and you want to play it and you want to make room for Bobble, go crazy. By all means, I support your efforts to try it out. For me, it has not been good. I have no intention of playing those cards. And yeah, that's about it. So that's my rant about those cards. Let's jump into the matches. Go ahead and get going with the first one. And we'll try to do a little more like deep dive in these matchups. I know a lot of people said that they really liked the last video, that I took a bunch of extra time, really dove into some of the lines. So I'm going to try to do that a little more often. I think it's like a nice medium between doing the full leagues and doing these shortened videos. So hopefully that helps a little bit. First hand of the day, one lander. Decided to keep it mainly because I have 2 pieces of 1 mana interaction, but more importantly, I'm on the draw, and if I find a second land at any point, the hand just like takes off. Turn 1, Swamp, Lantern of Insight. So we're against some sort of a Lantern control deck, and now we need to immediately be transitioning to what are we concerned about? What do our spells need to be targeting? We see a shadow on top. That's pretty dead as a we need land, so shadow's a pretty dead draw, but having an extra threat's not the worst thing in the world. And so now that we see Lantern, we have the ability to kind of manipulate our top card with the Misty Rainforest. Urza Saga on their side, but you need to be thinking, okay, we're the beatdown deck. How to describe this? We're the beatdown deck in the sense that we need to deal combat damage to kill our opponent, but we are the control deck in the sense that our opponent has ways of locking us out of the game, and we need to stop them from doing that. So recognizing what we need to interact with is extraordinarily important against decks like Lantern Control. And Snaring Bridge is a huge, huge card that you need to be able to fight over. Whir of Invention if they're on a more blue heavy deck, but I see Swamp, Urza Saga, so I don't think they're on a Whir of Invention build. Codex Shredder, Lantern of Insight aren't that important. I've got a lot of really good got a lot of really good interaction in hand. We just need to find lands to get it available. So we see Island on top. My hope here is that my opponent will not cast something that I want to fight over so that I can keep this island and draw into it. Obviously, a fetch land would be better for Shadow, but at this point, I just want Counterspell and Drown in the Lock online. So I think I end up kind of, yeah, there we go, moving some stuff around to make the screen a little easier to see. Urza Saga, really good. But thankfully, if they do end up making constructs, that might get my life down low enough to interact with Shadow. Again, one of those key cards we said to focus on was Ensnaring Bridge. Now we have the option to fight over one. Decide to burn the counter spell instead of the soft stubborn denial, mainly so that I can hold up this stub if I get a turn where I can play out a shadow or play out a Murktide with a mana available. I want to have interaction on that turn. Drawing Wraith, cycling it into a Watery Grave is fantastic because that's everything I want in a turn. I want to lower my life for Shadow. I want to get more land drops. So I'm all for that. Opponent gets down a Codex Shredder. Again, that's fine. Like, I've got the interaction I need. Now I just need to get the threat down. Got another Shadow. We've got this Fatal Push in hand for a Construct token. As far as Urza Saga targets go, they could get another Codex Shredder. They could get a um, another Lantern, Pixis. Not a ton that I'm scared about. It's all kind of like repetitive at this point. Underworld Cookbook's fine if they just want to like start ditching cards to prepare for the next living or for the next ensnaring bridge, because I've got answers to ensnaring bridge, so I'm not that concerned about that card. Opponent hits for 6. I want to take it because I want to get these shadows online. Now I have to think about how I'm interacting here. I could go like into turn, drown a construct, fatal push a construct, untap, play double shadow, hold up stub, something like that. But because I have this dismember on top of my library, I really want to use that to lower my life total even farther so that I might be able to like one shot my opponent or just get a couple hits in. They filter away the land off the top of my library, which at this point is fine with me. Like, I've got Counterspell, I've got Stub. Inventor's Fairs, fine. Pithing Needle, there's nothing I care about them needling here. So go for Street Wraith, sure. This is a dismember for the sole purpose of lowering my life total. I knew when I took dismember that I would not be able to kill this construct. It was a 5/5, but they had Underworld Breach up. So if I went for the dismember, they can make a food token, grow the construct to 6. But that's fine. I'm just trying to lower my life total so that when I play out this next shadow, regardless of what they do this turn, I'll have a lethal attack next turn, and I just need to counterspell anything that stops that. So I attack, whether they block or not, it doesn't matter. I'm going to have another shadow down with counter magic up. And we're just looking for like ensnaring bridge. Doesn't look like they're going to have the ability to play Whir of Invention, so I don't really care about that. We do need to remember that there is a Scalding Tarn on top of our library. So even though our opponent like gains this life here, Tarn means we're going to be able to grow the shadows to create a lethal attack. And that is exactly what we do, as long as we make sure we don't click a Watery Grave and shock ourselves. But I would say that Lantern Control is probably one of our better matchups. They don't have a lot of good interaction. We've got a lot of negate effects with the addition of Stubborn Denial. We've got Drown in the Lock as a 2-mana negate for basically their entire deck. Murktide can be really good against them using Codex Shredder to fill up our graveyard. We've got like EE post board, which sideboarding, I'm just boarding out like anything that says kill a guy, bringing in an extra dress down, bringing in the engineered explosives. I brought in a Turok just as like another threat to have access to. Brought in the spreading seas to help fight over Urza's sagas. And reasonable hand. Like we've got the Wraith into Thoughtseize on turn 1. We've got Dress Down to help fight over Saga. We can play out Turok on turn 2 if we need to. Just kind of play it by ear. Now we've got Shadow and a Stubborn Denial. So like we're set for just about anything we could need a Shadow, or we're set for about anything we could need to interact with. We've got the ability to get our Shadow online turn 2. We've got the Disruption of Thoughtseize. We've got a Soft Stubborn Denial, or it'll be a Hard Negate is starting on turn 3. We've got Dress Down in case we need to make this Shadow like a 2-turn clock. Thoughtseize. I'm usually a big fan of just taking the Ensnaring Bridge because, like, my opponent's, like, pretty likely to draw another one. So just take the first, have the stub for the second. Let them play out a Cookbook and a Lantern. Neither of those really bother me. Counterspell's a really good draw. So now I've just got like Soft Stub up and immediately follow that with like Stub plus Counterspell. And this one attack here will put my opponent down low enough to where they're dead to Dress Down on my next turn. And that's about all I can ask for. Go for the bridge. I decided to use my more expensive Counterspell. I was kind of expecting them to go for like Surgical on Counterspell on my upkeep or something, just to try to get it out of the way. And I was going to like Dress Down in response, but didn't work out that way. So now I get to just Dress Down, holding up Counterspell and Stubborn Denial. Present lethal. But yeah, they just need like too many turns to really set up. So we're able to squeak by. So this is round 2. Let's talk about the Mulligan decision. I say Mulligan decision. Mulligan indecision. No lands. You could keep it on the back of like, hey, if I hit a land with one of these street rates, I'm probably in good shape. And I wouldn't fault you, but it's not my favorite keep in the world. Second hand, yeah, it's pretty average. Like we've got Thoughtseize to Counterspell. It's really good. But at the end of the day, it's not like a phenomenal hand. Throw back the island because it's the worst land that we have access to. We really want to find like fetches for Shadow or to fill Murktide or get like Murktide in the yard sooner. Thoughtseize sees Amiria, Champion of the Parish, Thalia's Lieutenant, Force of Virtue, a couple Mutavault and a Plains. Gonna take the Champion here just so they don't have a 1-drop and I get to go into turn 2 holding up Counterspell. Champion of the Parish is like really not a very good threat, but I just want to interact with like whatever I can through these first couple turns to really try to set up Murktide. So like I'm holding on to Counterspell to try to be able to interact with something that's actually meaningful on the stack. The Stubborn Denial is probably going to be pretty dead. So back up Thalia's Lieutenant. So this attack in firing up the Mutavault and attacking with it and Lieutenant has to 100% mean Shining Shoal. Like I cannot think of another card here that has any sort of implication. So as soon as I see that, I'm getting whatever value I can out of this Stubborn Denial. 100%. The fact that I get to eat the Mutavault's just like a bonus. But bunch of street wraiths for later. We're just like looking for an additional Murktide or a shadow, just something we can put on the board. I don't want to attack because then I'm just dead if they hit a land. Use up the counter spell before the drown so that I can use the drown as a removal spell if need be. Now, unfortunately, we are dead on board. This was a bit of a mistake on my part. Uh, Not a huge mistake, but I should have just passed the turn. My thought here was, oh, I pay the one for Esper Sentinel and then I can drown. But I kind of forgot that Esper Sentinel was getting the extra power from Force of Virtue. And as soon as I cast Consider, I was like, oh, I got to pay 2. And now I would have to fetch to help out with paying if I cast another spell. And I just kind of like got behind on mana too much paying for Esper Sentinel. So I should have just passed the turn and held up Drown or considered if they didn't do anything. Sideboarding against the mono white humans deck, just trimming on wraiths and thought seizes, boarding out stubs pretty aggressively. They do have Force of Virtue and Shining Shoal, but I do still have Drown in the Lock, Counterspell, Archmage's Charm. So it's not like I'm dead in the water to those cards. Plus, the couple thought seizes I do have help play around those. Boarding in Engineered Explosives, Turok, Path of Peril, Turok mostly because it's just a pro white dude I can play out on the board and stands in front of everything. Um, Path of Peril being a wrath effect, boarding in Dress Downs to stop a lot of the ETB effects like Thalia's Lieutenant or Solitude. Reasonable opening hand. They do have a turn 1 Chancellor the Annex, which is a little annoying in the face of Thoughtseize. Then Chancellor into Esper Sentinel is even more annoying. So I kind of decide like, hey, just take the lumps, let them draw the card, but pay for the Chancellor. Because I mean, I'm gonna get my pick of whatever they draw anyway. So we see Thalia, Heretic Cathar, which if you don't know this one, Shadows over Innistrad staple, 2-1 or 3-2 with first strike for 2 and 1 white. And then it's got this ability that non-basic lands your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped, and creatures enter tapped. So they've got Thalia, Guardian of Thraben to tax my non-creature spells, Thalia to essentially tax my lands and creatures. Another Esper Sentinel, a Chancellor. I know I don't care about the Chancellor. The Esper Sentinel is pretty annoying. The Thalia is pretty annoying. So ultimately, I kind of think like the Thalia is the most annoying because it's like the biggest impact card they could play out on turn 2 here. But now that we've got this Thalia, we're just gonna sit pretty, see what happens. Turok does a really good job of standing in the way. We just have to be weary of Mutavault getting activated. But we do have the ability to like Fatal Push a Mutavault and pay for the Esper Sentinels. Sanctifier is pretty good because that will let them attack through Turok. So if you're like me, you're kind of thinking like, okay, how on earth do we get out of this? Thalia, double Esper Sentinel, Sanctifier, Mutavault, drawing lands. Backup Thalia. Pretty decent. We've got our fetch lands coming in tapped, which is a terrible feeling. But at least we can like fetch and get a basic, and that doesn't come in tapped. We will let them draw a card just to steal an Esper Sentinel, get a creature out of the way. Hey, that's a Murktide Regent. That's pretty good. Keep a dress down so that we can stop a Sanctifier on Vec for a turn or more. I did think this attack was pretty aggressive. Like, yeah, I've got a Murktide down now, but you're giving up whatever I want to kill off with this Turok. I mean, except for Sanctifier on Vec. But that could be like pretty costly if there's one thing that's kind of holding me back. Thalia being the one that stops my chump blockers from coming down, or not my chump blockers, my road blocks really, from coming down and kind of murking up the ground. But we'll just sit on these dress downs for a minute, kind of wait for an opportune call or opportune time. Decide to go for one into turn here. So if they did respond with like a solitude, I could respond with another sanctif or another dress down. But if they don't, and they just like don't have anything relevant into turn, then this just like shuts down Sanctifier for the turn, draws a card, stops them like in their tracks if they were thinking about attacking. In this case, lets me kill off the Sanctifier. Like, pretty good dress down. Not firing off Thoughtseize. But we will absolutely dress down Athalia's lieutenant. Just kind of hoping to find another removal spell. That's a pretty good removal spell, if I had to say so myself. So now we'll have the ability to wipe away everything but the Mutavault. We do lose our Turok, but I mean, I'm kind of okay with a 4 for 2 here if we get rid of Thalia, Thalia's lieutenant, Esper Sentinel, whatever. I do have to note that I do not have another fetchable source with the Scalding Tarn, so I cannot hold up Archmage's Charm. If I could, if I had like a basic island, I'd probably attack right there. All right. Drown in the Lock's great. Honestly, any interaction's great. Opponent tapping 6 mana is terrifying. Force of Virtue is fine. Like, I already need to deal with these creatures, so having to deal with the creatures being a little bit bigger is not that big of a deal. Finding Dress Down and another Drown is really nice. Looks like hard cast a Chancellor. Nope. Nope. If they're not hard casting Chancellor, I don't really know what they're doing here. Dress down end of their turn because this does make my creatures lethal. So they would have to block, and then I would have like double drown to deal with the 2 creatures left over. Thoughtseize sees a double Emiria, Chancellor of the Annex, and Thalia. Well, I've got double drown to deal with any of those that get cast, or double drown to deal with their 2 Mutavaults on board. But they have to block one of these or they're dead. Fire up a Mutavault, drown it. Fire up another Mutavault, drown it, because I know they can't do anything with what's in hand. And we steal game number 2. So on to game number 3 against the lovely, lovely mono white humans deck. Which, if you're playing a bunch in the leagues right now, you know that this deck is everywhere. Like, I see mono white humans at least every other league. At the very least. Champion of the Parish is pretty decent. I could Fatal Push there, but Champion of the Parish doesn't really scare me. What would scare me is my opponent playing like Plains Adeline here, and I want the Fatal Push to be able to interact with that. But if they're going to play Athalia, then obviously I'm going to interact with something here. And since my hand is just all creatures, then hey, I don't really care that much about Thalia. So instead, let's just try to set up a Turok for next turn, maybe, possibly. More Thalias. So no Turok next turn, unfortunately. No Shadow either. But maybe if we can just like hold out a turn, we can kick Turok. Values Lieutenant's D's. But we're still just like standing in the way of everything with a Murktide, so that's pretty cool. Get a Force of Virtue and an Adeline. Both pretty reasonable hits, so I'm kind of happy with that. They do get a big first striking Thalia, but ultimately that's okay because that just turns on double Death Shadows. And now Turok can stand in the way of any creature that they have. Backup Turok gets surged. Oof. Now we're going to start attacking with Murktide because if you don't know, if you haven't read the cards before, both Thalias have first strike. So there's a lot of interesting blocking scenarios you can come up with, like, oh, I'm going to block Big Thalia with a Death Shadow, and or block Little Thalia with a Death Shadow, block like the 3/3 Thalia's Lieutenant with a Shadow. Well, the Big Thalia is going to deal damage at the same time as Little Thalia, but both my shadows are going to grow to 6/6s after first strike damage, which means my one blocking the Thalia lives, my one blocking the Thalia's Lieutenant just eats it. And then, like, a Thalia's Lieutenant gets through for one, and I just have two massive shadows, a Turok and a Murktide. So I'm pretty okay with this blocking scenario. They could have, like, a Solitude, and Solitude the Shadow, but it would have had to have been exactly land Solitude or Solitude white card. Kind of got excited about that fire outlet. I was like, oh, crack it right away. Wait, can't crack it right away. I'll just play another small Murktide. Ultimately, like, it's up to my opponent to kill me right now. If not, I attack through with two lethal Murktides next turn. They can, if they Solitude my Shadow, if they Solituded my Shadow, they'd have lethal. I'd block the Thalia's Lieutenant, and they'd have 4, 8, 10, 11 plus Mutavault coming through. Yeah, I would be dead to that. But if they don't Solitude my Shadow, which they can't now that they've played their Emiria, then I get to just do some of those fun first strike blocks like I talked about. So Thalia, both Thalias deal first strike damage. The big Thalia gets blanked by the Turok, so Turok's going to kill the big Thalia. The little Thalia hits me for 4 in first strike damage, puts me down to 7. Shadows grows to 6/6. So the left Shadow is going to eat the Mutavault in regular damage. The right Shadow is going to eat the Thalia's Lieutenant, and this right Thalia's Lieutenant is going to get in for 2. So I'll take 6, go to 5, eat 2 of their bigger creatures, and untap with just like a board full of giant doofus dudes, and they're all going to attack over lethal. It was absolutely an attack by my opponent of I can't win, you got to mess up blocks, go. And thankfully, being the big brain shadow players that we are, we didn't mess up blocks too terribly. So beating mono white, very, very nice, tough matchup. The things that this Dimir deck really struggles with are like aggressive creature decks, which mono white is. It struggles really bad with like Ragavan, stuff like that. But either way, stealing that game super nice. We're up against Rhinos. They do have main deck Mystical Dispute, which is really annoying. It's like I want to get down this Murktide as quickly as I can, but Mystical Dispute really throws a wrench in that. So I kind of have to play in a way that gives me a chance to get down Murktide without getting punished by the dispute. Been a Street Wraith, draw a Street Wraith. Odawar is good for maybe being able to bounce a Rhino later. Fortunately, I haven't found like another Thoughtseize or a Stubborn Denial, so I can't Murktide hold up interaction. I was really hoping that they were going to fight over this Archmage's Charm with the Mystical Dispute, so that then I could Murktide hold up Counterspell, but unfortunately, my opponent decided to just draw Crashing Footfalls, or sorry, Violent Outburst. So instead, I've got to main phase Murktide and Counterspell it, which feels awful. But I do have a Murktide that's bigger than Rhinos, so that's a plus. Now, obviously, if they have more Rhinos, that's bad for me. Third Footfalls, or third Violent Outburst. But they're down to one card. I get to steal a Rhino. We're not attacking, though, because we don't want to be dead. And I'm A-okay aggressively trading whatever I can for these Rhinos. All right. So we do have the ability to hold up both Otawara and Counterspell, which I could have done there. Decided to aim for holding up counters, like double Counterspell instead, because my opponent can't attack through the Rhino and the Murktide right now. So all I got to do is like protect my board, and then if they do something weird or unexpected, then I can start fighting. But here I just have the ability to like fetch up a basic island, dismember a Rhino, hold up Counterspell. So I'm pretty okay with how this is progressing. But I have to start attacking with Murktide. Like if I don't attack, I can't win the game. But now I've just got Otawara plus hold up Counterspell. I want to make sure that I'm not putting myself dead to fire and ice. So I don't want to go to 2. And I've got to make sure I've got the fetchables available. So I can get basic island here, have 6 mana for Otawara plus Counterspell. And if my opponent does nothing, then I'm happy to just like bounce a Rhino. And hey, I think that is what they call checkmate. Like now you've got one card available. I've got Shadow. I've got double Counterspell. Should be okay. Anything that doesn't deal with the Murktide, I probably don't care about. Sideboarding against Rhinos, like Flusterstorms are coming in. Chalice of the Void. Chalice of the Void, very, very underrated against these Cascade decks. And I don't mean like underrated in general. I mean underrated out of these Dimir decks. Because you don't run Mishra's Bauble, so you don't care about Chalice on 0. But it's something that you can play for free that just sits there and they have to deal with it, and you can fight over their ways of dealing with it. And 9 times out of 10, they're like not expecting Chalice of the Void out of you. So they're probably not bringing in Force of Vigors and stuff like that game 2. So keep that in mind. Here, just a whole mess of counter spells. Do have to be careful of Blood Moon. There's like, I'd say it's close to a 50-50 as to whether my Rhino's opponent's going to bring in Blood Moon or not. On one side, it is good because it shuts off my black, which is Shadow, Thoughtseize, Drown in the Lock. But on the other side, I am just like a 2-colored deck. So I still get access to all my islands to Counterspell, Consider, Murktide, Stubborn Denial. So I would certainly not consider it any sort of like a slam dunk. Not fetching to play around Fire and Ice. I get to hold up my fetches so that I can like fetch when I need to respond and I don't put myself in a position where my opponent can tap me off of counterspell. Now I could go triple fetch shock, play a 2/2 shadow, but my opponent's not making a move. There's not really a big incentive for me to make a move. I thought that they were going to have a shardless agent here, but as soon as they pass and don't do anything, and they don't have red mana available for violent outburst, then I'm okay going for the consider. Because as soon as that's done, I get to untap and pass the turn with 4 lands, so I get access to double counterspell now. They can still have Mystical Dispute. They've got these Rhinos coming off suspend, but I can give a shot at fighting over these and see what they do. Doesn't really bother me if they like force of negation this, because then I get to untap, push one, have Murktide or something like that. It would kind of suck if they just have red source violent outburst right here. Red source endurance isn't nearly as bad. At least now I have like access to shadow. I've got fatal push or rhino or an endurance. I've got drown in the lock something. So ultimately, like I'm not mad about that exchange. There is the Blood Moon, another Rhino. So they're down to 1 card. They do not have double red for a second, or for a copy of Fury. Pick up another Drown in the Lock. That's extremely nice. So I can get my attack in here, because if they double block, I can like Drown in the Lock or Rhino. If they don't block, we'll just hit them in the face for a bunch, play Murktide, say go. And I believe this should be pretty close to wrapping it up. If this Drown in the Lock had been a counter spell, I would have let this Blood Moon go. But because I cannot cast the Drown in the Lock after the Blood Moon resolves, I kind of decide like, hey, I'm just gonna fade or kill the token. They can't have land plus Cascade spell. They don't have another land. Since I'm letting the Blood Moon resolve, it takes them off of double blue, so they can't have Murktide. So I'm just going to like kill the Rhino, go to my turn, attack. They could have Fire and Ice to tap down one of my attackers. That's fine. I'm not dead on the crackback. So, yeah. On to match number 4. Very, very meh hand. Like it's a 7, but I've got no threat. If Fatal Push is dead, then my first piece of interaction is a turn 3 Charm, which I could draw off of. Like, looking back, I'm not real happy with this keep. Thoughtseize is a good pickup. All right, so it's Scam. Do take the Blood Moon since they can't currently Fury. I do have the Fatal Push for the Dothy and potentially the Archmage's Charm for the Seasoned Pyromancer. But I do really need to find a threat like fairly quickly. I do have basic islands to help play around Blood Moon, so consider as a good pickup. Since they can't have a follow up to Thoughtseize, because they got Spyro and Fury, I decided to just fire off the Archmage's Charm. Unfortunately, it does draw me into the Murktide that they're able to take. So maybe in hindsight, just playing out or letting them Thoughtseize the Charm, if I'd known I was going to draw into a Murktide, would have been better. Yes, I could just play the Street Wraith there, just hard cast it. The problem is my opponent's got a known Fury. So if they have fifth land, then they get to just play the Fury, kill the Street Wraith, and I kind of wasted a turn doing that. And the Street Wraith isn't nearly fast enough of a clock to handle that kind of pressure. All right, so a little draw go action. I can dress down to grief, draw more lands. Kind of kind of what we expected. We did keep a 5-lander, so drawing a few more is not really like shocking. Kind of set ourselves up for that. On to game 2. Against Scam, boarding out like some Street Wraiths and Thought Seizes, boarding in extra dress downs. Yeah, there you go. Street Wraith, Thought Seizes, boarding in extra dress downs. Should have boarded in Shieldred's Edict. That one's really good here. Don't know why that one didn't get boarded in. Should be Shieldred's Edict over an extra Street Wraith. But either way, let's see how it plays out. I don't really want to be too aggressive with my life total on turn 1. Mainly because if my opponent has like turn 1 Ragavan, then I need to fetch, shock, dismember. And I don't want to have to do that after I've Street Wraithed against a Bolt deck. Could have counterspelled the Thoughtseize, but decided to just let it go. So I can get down Shadow here, hold up Counterspell. Opponent did miss their second land drop, so I'm kind of hoping that they'll have a bit of a weak opener. Best case scenario would have been they played like a Ragavan there that I could untap, dismember, or dismember and then untap and hold up double counterspell. But did not work out that way. I could fetch and shock, but I don't want to. I don't want to have my shadow dead to double bolt, and I don't want to have to burn counter spells to fight over one. So I would rather wait for them to put the first thing on the stack and then let me respond like this with fetching and shocking. I could dismember my own shadow there to make it a guaranteed 2-turn clock, but I think that's living a little too dangerously in the face of, again, a lightning bolt deck that could just have double bolt. So instead, I'll wait, hold up counterspell, give myself the option to do that next turn and be in a better shape. All right. This is the game that absolutely drove me crazy. So my opponent evokes a grief here and then went to pay costs and realized that they hadn't played their land yet. So they couldn't undying their grief. And then proceeded to miss their second land drop. So I'm feeling like on top of the world here. I've got lands, I've got interaction, I've got dress down, whatever the case may be. I just need to like live. No play on turn 2 is nice. All right, deck, you can ease off the lands a little bit, but I've got like soft stubborn denial for Blood Moon or Fable. So I had to cycle the dress down. Okay, we've got a threat. Step one. Step one accomplished. I don't want to play out the threat yet because it's dead to everything under the sun. Uh, I could counter the grief, but I wanted to try to draw something more relevant stuff because I knew I'd be able to fatal push the grief once it resolved. I wanted to be able to find like another counter spell or another threat, but I found two lands, which is the worst case scenario, not only because it's two lands off of the Archmage's Charm, but if you notice, it is the other two copies of Watery Grave, which means I can no longer fetch shock Watery Grave and fatal push the grief. So, absolute worst two draws in the deck. And then just pure unadulterated frustration because it's immediately getting followed by this fury that I could have countered if we had been able to fatal push the grief, if we had had access to a watery grave in our deck in response to that trigger. So when I say like the two watery graves were the worst draw imaginable, I absolutely mean it. Now, in hindsight, we can say should have just countered the grief, wouldn't have had to worry about it, but we still would have had to deal with like this fury that we didn't have an answer to. We couldn't play the shadow because it was just dead to everything. So I don't hate the Archmage's Charm play. Like, obviously, it didn't work out in the long run, but I'm not completely against it. Just drawing the double watery grave hurt bad. So be it. That's how it goes sometimes. So this is on to match number 5. We're on the play, reasonable hand with soft stub on turn 1. A lot of people ask like why sometimes I cycle street wraith, sometimes I don't. And really it comes down to like composition of the hand. For example, if my opponent's on a mulligan, if I draw a Thought Seize, I would cast it here. Sometimes I'll have opening hands where I've got like a Wraith, a Thought Seize, a Stubborn Denial. So I'm not really looking for anything with a Wraith or anything I would rather do. So I'm usually okay just like waiting because if I'm up against Burn, I don't want to cycle the Wraith just blindly. Um, but it's kind of a gut feeling thing. Like, you also want to take into account how well can my deck turn the corner. So if I find a shadow here, how well can my hand get shadow online? Not very well, so I'm gonna need to lose that life aggressively anyway. Breeding pool. So we do know our opponent is a very notorious living in player. So that's kind of my assumption going into this game. Obviously, can't know that for sure, but that is a deck they're very, very familiar with, and it looks like that is the case this game. One living end out of the deck already is very nice. Unfortunately, their hand is very well set up. Yeah, very well set up for grief if they happen to find one. But they don't have red mana currently. So we'll take the Cascade spell that they can cast. Even though Violent Outburst is the better Cascade spell, I feel taking the one that they can't cast, or taking the one that they can cast and making them cycle to find a way to cast the second one is pretty advantageous. Could play out the Murktide here, but if they find the red source, then they outburst and I can't do anything about it. So I don't want to play out the Murktide. Instead, I get to go to my next turn, play out the Murktide, hold up Counterspell and Stubborn Denial. And look how bad, for the people keeping track at home, look how awful. I don't even want to say bad. I want to say like awful or atrocious or whatever synonym you need to use for really, really terrible. Basic Swamp would look here. This is what I'm talking about when I say you shouldn't play the Basic Swamp. If you happen to have it in your hand and you drew it right here and you're sitting here with Murktide, Counterspell, Stubborn Denial, Basic Swamp like absolutely destroys this hand because now you have one Counterspell available instead of two. And that is a world of difference against a deck with like Force of Negations and stuff. I was kind of open to incentivize them to Violent Outburst at the end of their turn by cracking that fetch, but they did not. So, got to go to our turn. They do have the Force of Negation. We've got to fight over this Outburst anyway. So, now we get to pass their turn with Stubborn Denial. And again, this is what I mean. If at any point we were playing a basic swamp and we had it, we lose this game because we cannot cast Counterspell, Stubborn Denial, or the Murktide the turn before. So thank you, mic drop. I'm out of here. I am ecstatic that I got to give my reasoning for not playing basic swamp, and it played out that way. Now, yes, we did play against the Blood Moon deck the round before this, and they had Blood Moon, or the round before that, and we saw Drown in the Lock that we had to cast in response to the Blood Moon. Blood Moon is there, but Blood Moon did not beat us the first game, the game against Rhinos. They played it at a scam, but the game was already gone. We were like past Blood Moon mattering. But here, the not having a basic swamp actively mattered. And so, yeah, I will take the odds there. Sideboarding against Living In, very straightforward. If it says like kill a creature, it's probably coming out. If it says exile a graveyard, like Nihil Spellbomb or Unlicensed Hearse, it's coming in. Or if it says counter something like Chalice of the Void, Flusterstorm, then it is coming in as well. Sometimes I might bring in an extra dress down if I'm like light on counters or Grave Hate out of the board, because being able to answer Grief is kind of nice. And it's got a Leyline of Sanctity. That's pretty okay because I've just got a bunch of counter magic. As we see, they did not cast any sort of cycle effect, or didn't cycle, not cast cycle, but they didn't cycle anything turn one. So I'm expecting like the big dude. Yeah, Waker of Waves. Put a Subtlety in the yard. That's pretty okay. Grief's fine. I've got all these counter spells. Just kind of hanging out, waiting for an opportunity. Now I know they cannot have Violent Outburst and Force of Negation, or Violent Outburst, Force of Negation, blue card. So I know I'm safe during my turn. And if I have the ability to like petty theft this Leyline, untap, and Thoughtseize, especially if I find a fourth land, then I feel pretty golden. If they had played a fourth land, I would not go for this petty theft here, because I would not want my opponent to respond with Violent Outburst and get around Soft Stubborn Denial. But here, I'm kind of taking the calculated risk of, hey, if you've got Outburst and Force of Negation and blue card, then you got it. But if you don't, then I'm going to tear apart the rest of your hand We'll go ahead and make Shadow as big as we can. Give them one draw step to find a Cascade spell with no searches. And if they don't find it, then I'm never tapping off of Drown and Lock again. So they miss that turn. We end up taking that game. Nice little 4-1 league there. Again, I was really glad to showcase the fact that the basic swamp does matter. Playing it is not free. So anybody that says playing the basic swamp is free, not the case. Hate to tell you, but get that thought out of there. If you want to play the basic swamp again and you accept the risk, then by all means play the basic swamp. But you get into a weird spot where you need to play like extra black fetches, or you're not going to see the basic swamp reliably when you want to, because you'd only have 4 polluted delta in the basic swamp to see it. And black fetches are really awkward because you're more interested in having access to the basic islands. So yeah, good luck balancing that mana base if you go down that route. Ledger Shredder, I don't think would have like won or lost anything that we didn't or weren't able to win or lose against anyway. And what was the other one? Tainted Indulgence. We kept a few one-landers, and I don't even think we kept one-landers with Consider. I think we kept one-landers with like Street Wraith or a Prayer. But I still believe that like Tainted Indulgence in the face of all these 2-mana counter spells, plus like Archmage's Charm and stuff, makes it pretty awkward. I think if you're wanting to run Tainted Indulgence for whatever reason, I would like up the Stubborn Denials or find room for some Spell Pierces or something, so that you can have 1-mana interaction to pair with your 2-mana cantrip. But you got to be careful about like Spell Pierce because it is not very good against Leyline Binding, and that is a very good card against our deck. But otherwise, hope y'all all enjoyed the video. A little bit of a deeper dive. As always, if you have questions about the list or the plays or anything like that, feel free to drop them in the comments down below. Otherwise, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Greatly helps to grow the channel. Really makes this content a lot more fun to make. And yeah, we'll have the link to the deck list down below. I have a link to the Twitch channel if you're wanting to check out any of the live streams. And other than that, I hope y'all have an awesome rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. Adios for now.